Today on the Videomaker podcast, we talk to Michael Grecco, who is a photographer and a director. Michael is really known for his world-class portrait photography. He's taken all kinds of photos of celebrities and athletes, which are really, truly stunning. You know, he shot people like Chris Farley and Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese and Ben Stiller, like all kinds of personalities who everyone surely knows. So, you know, he's, like I said, primarily a photographer. He has done quite a bit of directing. We talk a lot today about, you know, the image creation process and, you know, the creative process and how you can find inspiration in, you know, everyday life or in dreams or whatever, and how that can translate into really stunning images. So I think there's a lot of takeaways here from people who are shooting video explicitly and solely. But also, I think there's some takeaways for people who are doing both, or who are shooting video or film or trying to get into photography. So very interesting conversation with Michael. He has some great tips and insights into the direction process, directing for stills, and how that might translate to working with motion and the reverse. So hope you learn a lot. Hope you get a lot out of this conversation. As always, if you've been listening to the podcast and you enjoy it, we would love it if you went to iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts and hit the subscribe button or the heart button or the like button or whatever it is, and it will deliver the podcast right to your mobile device every Monday morning at 5 a.m. So that will be ready for you. It makes it really, really convenient for you. It is also big time helpful for us. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's get on to our conversation with Michael Grecco.
When was the last time you were stuck in post-production, needing visual effects services like rotoscoping, match moving, or compositing? Or how about green screen editing, beauty retouching, and color grading? With quality visual effects and sound design, there is no such thing as too good to be true. Fiverr is home to thousands of sellers who offer services that can transform any visual from ordinary to captivating and engaging. Okay, so your production may look good, but what's the point if it doesn't sound good? Sound designers can create and edit your needed sound effects to add a whole new level of experience. From audio engineers to Foley artists that make sure you get the exact sound you want. Fiverr has all that you need for your post-production. Let Fiverr bridge the gap between your imagination and your final production.
Welcome to the Videomaker podcast. I'm Mike Wilhelm, and with me, as always, across the very long table is Chris Monlux.
Hello.
And today we have special guest photographer Michael Grecco. Michael, how's it going?
Hey guys, it's going great. Thanks for asking.
Good, Michael. So you're quite an accomplished photographer. You know, anyone who will, you know, browse your website, I'm sure will see photographs that they recognize of celebrities and athletes. Like the stuff that you do it's really world-class stuff. But maybe before we get into, you know, the specific craft of what you're doing now, maybe you can give us just, just a high-level overview of how did you get to where you are today? How did you get started in photography?
Sure. I started in a summer camp. Basically, I tell the story before, but I was into the darkroom and learned photography at like age 13. So it was like the magic of the darkroom, watching prints come up, being fascinated by the technology at the time of actually developing film, you know, making a print, watching it come up in the developer. And I went to college knowing I wanted to be a photographer. I had studied photography in high school. I had taken some college courses, and I was offered to intern for the Associated Press during the blizzard of 78, which happened like 2 weeks before my internship. I skied into the Associated Press office in downtown Boston, and that's how I started my career. I shot 2 or 3 rolls of film, and from that moment on, I never looked back.
So at some point along the way, you dabbled in filmmaking, right? So you had a film that came out, 2009? So how did the film world kind of enter into your career?
I think for a professional photographer, directing is sort of a very natural a natural extension of what we do. It's, you're directing people, you have a vision, you know how to get talent to do what you need them to do. And I had started shooting in tandem and directing on my commercial shoots. So I had started, if I had an ad campaign for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida, they asked me to do, some web spots. And that's really how all of that started for me. And in 2007, I had gone and documented the Adult Video Awards in Vegas. And during that experience, we were shooting B-roll. I was doing a coffee table book, and we were shooting B-roll, and the B-roll was so good and the interviews were so candid, we wound up making it a documentary that Warner Brothers released.
So that transition, or maybe not a transition, it's more like a translation of your skills from still to motion. We always talk about that there are a lot of parallels in terms of, shooting a still image versus shooting motion. But how did you adapt to that? What was it like for you to make that shift, not only technically, but just sort of in your mind and how you approached the subject?
It was very natural for me. My degree isn't actually in broadcasting and film. So I went to Boston University, and I have a Bachelor of Science in broadcasting and film. And those were my studies. My minor was in photojournalism, and that's how I started my professional career. But I was technically trained in the film world, although it was many years ago. But it's the most natural thing in the world for me. It's like we did this spot with a comic, and I had mentioned Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida. We went down to Florida. We shot this guy on white for billboards and outdoor press and print, and spent the whole day with him. And then they were like, "Hey, while you're there, can you direct a video?" And I had never directed a video before. So the account manager, the art producer wasn't there, but the account manager was there. And we did this whole day, and it went great. And, just many years of working with talent. And I looked at the account manager for the account, who was the representative of the ad agency there. And I said, "Not bad for my first day directing, huh?" She goes, "What?" I said, "No, just kidding." But of course I wasn't kidding at all. It was, I didn't want her to have a heart attack. It's like, oh, what did our art producer do? Give me someone who's never directed before.
So I have to imagine, Chris and I think we would classify ourselves as amateur photographers at best, I guess. And, we were talking recently to Brian Caparici of Sprout Studio about the differences in directing someone in front of a motion picture camera versus a still camera, and how those of us who've been shooting video for a long time, it's natural to get people to try to perform a certain way and get certain have them read lines a certain way or behave a certain way, but then as soon as you try to do that same thing with still photography, at least for me, I can't speak for Chris, I guess, but that's quite challenging to get them to do exactly what you want for stills. So, for you, it sounds like it was natural. But did you notice any inherent differences in trying to get just sort of these authentic looking performances out of people for motion versus still? Is your process much different there?
I think we sort of joke in the industry, other photographers, assistants, that still photographers make much better directors than directors make still photographers, because directing takes a sense of what you want. It's the aesthetic of how a line is read or what someone's going to do, and we've developed that aesthetic. But directing someone for still images, it gets into real subtleties. It's like body position and how does someone look good, and their micro moves that directors don't deal with. And we joke that directors don't make good photographers, but photographers can make good directors.
I think that even comes into, photographers getting into videography is the exposure triangle is as you expect, and nothing really changes going from photo to video. I mean, there's some subtleties to have to pay attention to, but if you're a video shooter and you weren't used to the same exposure triangle, it's a translation for you to get into understanding that. And I think the same thing is for directing people. I think you're totally right. Like when I've been around, really skilled portrait photographers, it's so interesting of like, okay, we're going to move here, cook your neck just a little bit this way. And like, that seems super macro to the way you direct a scene otherwise, because those little things are fleeting so quickly on video, whereas like that's the moment for stills. And it does. I think it is an easier transition to go from stills, because I think there's a different expectation, a deeper expectation in that still life versus like, oh, I can be a little bit more free with how people are moving because they're going to be moving through the scene. I need movement, which you have to imply with an image with the still anyway. So I think that's it makes sense to go that way. I'd almost even wonder like how I imagine a lot of DPs are good at composition in general. But if you were saying a DP versus a director, how much better of a photographer you might get just talking to the DP, because I think they care about those things more than maybe a director would. But I think that typically, like we write a lot of content about going from, to harness. Now we have hybrid cameras that can do both. Why not dive into the photo world? So we're talking to videographers going in the still world. And it's always about breaking those habits that we built in video because they're not as translatable, or you do them in a different way.
First of all, I think you might have misspoke. Those moves that still photographers do are very micro in comparison to video. They're micro moves, not macro moves. They're little hip twists and exactly crook your neck this way or do that, or we get into observing someone in between the frames and we see something we like and we ask them to do it again. That happens often, right? Totally. So, but yeah, you're right. And the thing is I direct, and I just want to be clear. I don't like operate a camera. Like I can't do stills and direct and shoot the video camera. Yeah, right. Like, so if I'm doing a combined day, I have a DP on, and they're, that's the only way to do it. Because it's too distracting. The cameras are set up differently. It's like, as much as you can say, I have a camera that can do both, that's the last thing you're going to do, because, for stills, you're set up with strobes, and, the video camera might have neutral density filter in it so that you're shooting at a shallow depth of field. The approach is completely different. So I leave the technical part to my DP, and I like to sit there at the monitor and watch what's coming into Video Village and what I'm getting back, and making sure that I'm directing the expressions, the lines, the movement, all of that, and getting that the way I want it.
Yeah, totally. I totally was. You're right. I was saying macro. I meant micro. I actually signed up for the wrong economy class in college because I got that wrong, which is kind of funny.
I had an Indian economics professor as a freshman at Boston University, and I could not understand what he was saying when he said macro and microeconomics. I'm like, what?
That's funny. The movement that you're looking for. Yeah, I mean, like that's the having photography hat on versus a film director, what have you. Like there's so much now that we have these cameras that can do both, so clients can have some expectation. Oh, you might be able to do both. Who were we talking to recently? And we were talking about that they would be like, let's now do a social cut of this. But the whole idea there is it's 9:16, not 16:9.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can dual shoot them at the same time. The framing's all different, and there's so much left and right brain there of like, you can't really do them simultaneously, although it seems like you should be able to. Currently, there's not a whole lot of work there, and I think the idea of shooting, like I've done a lot of shooting while there's photographers shooting the same scene, and it's like, unless I have constant light, I can't even exist in the same place. The strobes are just not going to do any good unless I'm telling a story about photography. So you definitely are thinking of different solutions, like you're saying, like you're going to use an ND on your film camera so that you can have shallow depth of field, whereas you can do it a whole different way in a still.
Yeah, and like I said, I think our approach is to set up the cameras for what you need, and then roll the camera in, because you can't go back and forth. You can't. All your exposures are different. Everything you're doing is different. It's like,
what works with one is not going to work with the other. I mean, you might get lucky from time to time for there to be crossover, but I think that's a total outlier for sure.
Yeah, they might even be different types of cameras.
Totally.
I mean, the only thing that they have in common is they've got my SanDisk cards in them. So I think that's about the only thing that they all have in common. But it's, you might use a particular camera. You might need to shoot red. You might need to, and your still camera, you might be medium format or 35 millimeter equivalent. And we bring the right tools for the job, and unless you're doing everything on an iPhone, I think it's next to impossible to keep switching those. Even though you can multi-purpose a camera, it's next to impossible to keep switching those back and forth.
Absolutely.
So, I just am recalling a story. I probably have told this story on this podcast before about Stanley Kubrick when he shot Spartacus. And, Stanley Kubrick was a photographer by trade, before he really became known as a legendary filmmaker.
Life magazine.
Yes, that's right. I just read the story of when he shot Spartacus. He was so frustrated as DP, he told him, "Your job is just to sit there and do nothing. I'm going to shoot this movie." So, I have to imagine that, for someone who really is on the bleeding edge of portrait photography, looking at the quality of your work and just knowing how, the filmmaking process goes. Actually, another short story. Anyone who heard our episode, I believe it was with Michael Walsh, was talking about how when you're shooting film, you get one good shot before lunch and one good shot after lunch, and everything else is just work. So what is that like for you as you're in Video Village, as someone who is a master of still photography, basically looking at the results of someone else's cinematography through a monitor, going through this process of this is just work, and not every frame is going to be a painting, so to speak.
I don't know. I've written 2 best-selling lighting books, and I always have an idea of how it should look, because to me, the lighting is, I do a lot of conceptual portraits, a lot of storytelling in my magazine portraits, and the lighting is it's the last touch to the emotional nature of the shot, like dark, light, bright, happy, intelligent, comic. How you light it helps push that that communication that much further. And I am on set telling the grips and gaffers and crew what to do, and they're looking at me as if they need to hear it from the DP, and the DP looks at me and goes, if he wants it, just do it. And I start directing the lighting portion of it. The DP takes care of the camera moves, because he knows how it's going to cut together, and he knows what he can do with his body or with an assistant or pulling focus, and I leave the moves to them, but I'm always in there, like telling the crew where to place the light and where to place the silk and what to do. And, you know, 'cause I've done it for 30 some odd years.
Yeah, the light definitely is that last little bit that just turns something that's kind of blah into really something that pops and stands out. So for you who have done both filmmaking and photography, what is it in particular about photography that compels you to that over film? And maybe I'm making an assumption here that is undeserved, but it seems to me you're primarily a photographer, right? So what draws you to that more so than film?
You know, an image, you know, an image sits there and you look at it afterwards and you just feel so proud, or you have that sense of accomplishment. I think many artists love creating, and a video's not the same. It's not tactile. It's not, you know, you have to start it up and be patient, and, you know, and it's something, you know, it's still a tangible thing, but it's not a tangible thing. It's not a photograph. To me, is more tangible, and as an artist, it's so it's just rewarding taking a classic portrait of someone, or you know, being, you know, I have a new book coming out called Punk, Post-Punk, New Wave, On Stage, Backstage, In Your Face, 1978 to 1991. It's a very long title. I have to remember it each time. I have to concentrate. And, you know, you look at those pictures and they're moments of history, and you're just like, you know, I look at that and go, wow, A, I lived that. B, look at what a cool picture that is. You know, C, you know, that was a historic moment in time. There's a sense of wonder and astonishment. You know, there's even astonishment that, you know, I lived through that. So, you know, that's the beauty of photography. And, you know, when I talk about it tangible, you know, something tangible, then, you know, it's a print that goes on somebody's wall. It's a book. You just perceive it differently than a video. You know, I guess you could put a monitor up, you know, in your house and run art videos all the time, and, you know, that's its own experience. But I think that you know, creating something like that where it feels so good. You know, it really feels so good.
You know, I think the especially when it comes to photography versus video is typically the amount of hands or the amount of influence between the person that's capturing the frame and the final product, right? So, like, you know, if you took an image on film and then you developed it, even if you got to develop it or whatever, there's more connection, you know, there's more of you on that final product versus, like, if you're working on you know, you got a lighting crew, a DP, you know, all sorts, you're so, you know, one slice of that final product that when the final thing comes on there, you kind of share the experience, resolve with everyone, you know, oh, we all made this together. That's great. And it's, you know, it's like winning a team game or a team sport versus like a sport that really is, you know, just individual. I think that for me, like, I know that the more I'm doing, like, even in a video project, if I'm the only one that, like, I wrote it and I shot it and I did all that kind of stuff, it has a different feeling when I get done with it than it is that thing I did with a group of people. Now, of course, the thing with the group usually has far higher expectations, far higher quality, you know, or you know, just a different bar completely. But that like personal, like, this is this thing that I made. Now, yeah, we're not holding it. The feelings you get from film are not tangible versus, you know, tangibly being able to touch or move or place an image in a place. You know, I mean, just hanging an image on a wall will change the feeling of that room. That's not the same as when the film's on the TV, you know?
Yeah. But as a director, here's something that I learned both as a still photographer and a director is it doesn't matter how many people are on the crew. If you're the director, you have to make sure you get what you want. Yeah. And if someone has a suggestion or creative input and it's off brand, so to speak, it's off message, it doesn't matter. Like, you're the the buck stops with you. It's so that's the thing to remember. And it's great to collaborate. I collaborate on my still shoots. It's nice if an assistant makes a mention about lighting, but ultimately, as a director or a photographer, you're responsible. It always miffed me, these photographers that I've heard about from assistants that never knew how to light anything and never knew how to really do anything, but they were charming and talent, or a model walked on and they snapped the pictures and the assistant set everything up. And it's like, what does that say though, from a visual communication standpoint about their work? Like, whose work is it? So for me, it's like it always stops with me. It's like, from in the punk book, it's like I had a mission. I had to come back with an interesting picture. I had to do whatever I needed to do to be in position, to grab someone backstage, to bring a piece of seamless paper and tape it on the wall. Whatever was needed, you had to come back with something interesting that was different. And, I learned that back then, and I still have that attitude now.
All right. So maybe that's a good spot to just take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
At Videomaker, we're obsessed with cinematography. We can't get enough of the process, the industry, the product, the people. And we know our audience of filmmakers and film enthusiasts love it too. That's why we want to invite you to our upcoming virtual event on cinematography. This free virtual event will be held on November 11th at 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. You can register in under a minute at videomakerevents.com. You'll gain access to exclusive content, insight from industry experts, and more. Once again, register for free at videomakerevents.com.
Okay, and we're back. So we were just talking about kind of, the big the differences between photo and video outside of the obvious. But one that I think that a big advantage to photography that video and film doesn't have as much of is kind of like the playful aspect of what you can do with a single frame. So what makes me think of this is, I'm looking at some of your photos of celebrities, and there's this incredible photograph of Steve Martin where he's sort of like melded into the bushes, into like a hedge, and he's got this notepad and a pencil. And, this is a shot where it just is a great expression of Steve Martin's personality. And at the same time, in film, it would probably be pretty difficult to find an excuse to use a photograph or a shot like this. And yet you can play with these kinds of circumstances with photography, because the only context you have is really what's inside that frame. So I'm curious, when you're shooting these kinds of things, when you consider, kind of a shot like that, or another shot that I've seen, I don't see it on the website here, but a shot of Chris Farley, and there's like a random leg sticking out from the side of the frame, and he's holding it. It's like that. I don't know what the context is there, but it makes a compelling image, which seems like it would be difficult to replicate in a film. So where do you draw your inspiration for these kinds of shots?
I mean, my job, most of my work has been done for magazines over the years, and magazine covers or magazine feature stories. And my job is to illustrate that story. So, when Steve Martin writes his memoir, how do you talk about that in a visual medium? And that's really what it's about to me. It's like, I then have to figure out, how do you communicate that? And this, we were originally supposed to shoot in his garden, and it morphed into, okay, he's been writing his memoir all his life because it's his memoir by definition. And the garden's grown around him, and that's why the paper and the pad, and he's thinking, and, all of that is in a way, I'm a photographic illustrator when it comes to editorial photography, because we're tasked. I started out working for the Associated Press. I became a staff photographer at the Boston Herald, and I was invited to be staff, or the equivalent of staff, at People magazine. And in all three of those jobs, I was a photojournalist, and photojournalists tell stories literally, right? They tell their story, the who, what, when, where, and why, but it's literal. It's, I when I teach and show my work, I talk about having to shoot for the Boston Herald, Joe of Joe's shoes. And what's the natural thing you do with Joe of Joe's shoes is you take him outside, he's holding a shoe, and there's a sign above him that says Joe's shoes, right? And that's the literal story of a newspaper photographer or, someone in the media, where if you think about it, especially in the days of newspapers, the reproduction wasn't very good. People are reading it quickly. It's not big on subtleties, things like that. But then you go and you shoot a feature for Entertainment Weekly or, another high-end magazine, Time, or People, as a more of a illustrative photographer, not as a photojournalist, and you get to tell a story. And that story could be surreal, it could be dark, it could be comic, it could be, and it's not anything but has to be literal. Like no one wants to see the literal storytelling in a magazine because it's not sophisticated, it's not smart. So, my inspiration comes from, dreams. It comes from, that moment when you're just waking up or just going to sleep, that your subconscious, but they usually come to me through intuition and opening that portal up between my subconscious and my conscious mind. And we all have it and we all have creativity. I think when we equate to not having creativity, it's because we're not listening to those voices or those thoughts that are creativity, that, is your intuition saying, oh, this would look cool, and you have to be open to that and you have to hear it.
Yeah, being willing to hear your creative thoughts is something that a lot of people don't. They're just not coming up with ideas. You should be able to come up with lots of ideas. I mean, are they good or not? Whatever. But being creative and coming up with thoughts and ideas should be a freeing thing. But we make fantastical thoughts in our dreams. Our dreams are always so magical and so out there. I mean, I've had the whole stream of things, but that in your dreams you feel free enough to have those, right? Whereas I think in real life people limit themselves, maybe even as young as children, to going, I can't let that in. That's not, or it's not helpful or what have you. And people tend to lose that. It kind of reminds me of like the Peter Pan or like the movie Hook, of like eventually you forget that special thing that helps you be creative. But hopefully you stay tied to that. And I think that that's through exercising that muscle and being free and open to hearing those good creative thoughts come through. I mean, sometimes they're not good, but being willing to listen to them anyway is good too.
That's true.
It seems
That's
like
very, very true.
It seems like there's also like an element of being willing to take risks as well, right? Like no great artist is everything that comes out of their brain is fantastic. And, I wouldn't call myself a great artist or even a mediocre artist, let alone a middling artist. But I have to imagine that for every great work that you make, there's got to be piles of work that is just okay or something that didn't live up to your expectations.
It paid the bills. That's what it did.
Yeah, exactly. So, Michael, in your experience, how does that go? Like, if you come up with these ideas in dreams, or you're drawing inspiration from wherever, what is normal for you in terms of something that meets what you initially believed to be its full potential?
Well, let me back up to say, though, as a magazine shooter or commercial shooter, you're only judged on the last job you do for people.
Right.
So there can't be a whole lot of mediocre work. You wouldn't survive. You have to hit it and beyond as much as possible. So I am tasked every time I go out to make something that engages the reader. And I have to go out the door every day being as creative as possible. And sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't. It's, but you do have to be fearless, and you do have to jump off that cliff, and you do have to try stuff. I mean, the story that I like is, when I transitioned from photojournalism to, I'll call it magazine illustrative photography. In the early 90s, I was doing some creative work. It got me noticed. I did a jewelry story for the LA Times Sunday magazine, and it was very moody, black and white. They were copper-toned prints, because we would actually make prints back then, and the magazine would scan them before it was digital photography. And this portfolio got me the job to shoot the first X-Files show. And at that point, I would always go out, especially the jewelry story was my own idea, so I had a vision for it. But I would go out and think, wonder what the client wants, wonder what the client thinks, wonder what the client needs, wonder what the client, and that's a place in and of itself of fear. Mm-hmm. Will I be liked? Will they like my work? Will I do okay? Will I do? And my friend Richie Costers, who used to be my assistant, became the director of photography at Fox Television. And I said, Rich, what do you want? And he just said, do what you do. Do what because I had this very moody black and white portfolio. He's like, I want you to do what you do. And once at that moment, I came to the realization that, that drop the fear and fly. Like, just fly, like, do what you do, make it cool. Like, and at that moment, I stopped working. It was almost like right on the spot. At that moment, I stopped working from a place of fear. And I realized that what I have to offer is interesting and people want it. And really, that's what, how I approached everything. Now, as a sophisticated photographer, human being with some experience, you're like, you place these little things in and around your head. So one is, okay, what's the magazine look like, and then who am I shooting, and are they going to be happy, and are they willing to do this, and you balance all of that with your vision, but you have to have your vision, and that's what you're hired for.
That's interesting. So you have a book coming out, or it's out now, I guess, or no, it's coming out soon. Punk, post-punk, new wave.
When do we air?
Yeah, good question. When do we air?
This comes out the 9th, and what's the book's the 11th? Is that correct?
No, the book's the 10th. So we'll say the book is out.
Yeah, we're out tomorrow.
Effectively out.
Yeah.
But I also see that you have a docuseries coming out on the same topic. The docuseries happened already. That was Punk on Epics, and that came out last year. Oh, I see. And
I was the original creator of that show and one of the executive producers. So that happened. We're putting that up on the website to give me a little street cred, but that's already happened. I'm focused on the book and publicity for the book, and I just got them the other day. I think they look amazing. Again, it's called, and I have to concentrate on this, Punk, Post-Punk, New Wave, on stage, backstage, and in your face, 1978 to 1991. And yes, I shot all those pictures when I was a child.
So for those that aren't familiar with the whole project, I'm well versed in it now. Give us an explanation, really, like what these images are, where they came from, and like what was the inspiration for creating the book.
So I grew up in New York, in Westchester. I was born in the Bronx, but I grew up in Westchester, and I was like a jazz snob as a kid. To me, that was like the early 70s was a dark period for rock and roll, where you had all of these heavily produced bands that record companies produced, Boston and Rush and Kansas, and things that were, to me, musically not authentic. There were some gems out at the time, Iggy Pop and David Bowie and Roxy Music and the Velvet Underground, but for the most part, commercial music sucked. And so I was a stringer for the Associated Press, and I lived up the street from Kenmore Square in Boston, and I bopped my head into the Rathskeller, which was a dirty dive bar, smelly, sticky, horrible, smoke-filled, and I heard punk music live in 1977 or 78 for the first time. And what developed out of that was me having this dual life. I was a Associated Press photographer during the day. I'd put on my hiking boots and sharpened my elbows and, fought in any press pack or, did what I needed to get my picture. And then at night, I'd put on a leather jacket and take my camera and photograph the punk scene. And these pictures have been sitting in my file cabinet for 40 years, essentially. It was my archivist that basically said, these are too cool, you have to do something with it. So it's been sort of a 5-year project. I'm sure, any photographer who's had to pull stuff out of an archive and do research, it just took us time to research it, to edit it, to scan it, and right up to the last minute of press time, we were still editing pictures, because my archivist found the original publications of Boston Rock online. I'd shoot for Boston Rock and the K-Rock station in Boston, WBCN. And right up until press time, we were like, oh, look at those pictures that they printed, and we're going and we're rescanning stuff and dropping them in. The art director who laid out the book actually had placeholders dropped in there from the tear sheets that were really low quality. And my scans and getting those pictures out, we held up the book for it. So it's basically a deep dive into my archive of 5 years of living in that scene, and then at night, and then subsequently a couple of shoots and a couple of bands that happened afterwards. I was asked to shoot Al Jorgensen of the band Ministry for Ray Gun magazine, and Daniel Ash for Cream magazine afterwards, and we've incorporated those pictures in, but the bulk of that work was shot from 78 to about 85.
Now, these images are of concerts, but they're also, you had access and got to shoot the acts backstage and in portraits and stuff as well, right?
Yes. I mean, I know a lot of people that shoot music now, and access has totally changed. Most people, unless you're with the band, you don't get an all access pass, and you're not backstage, and you don't have access, and you shoot 5 songs, and then they kick you out. And it's back then we had total access, and it was a combination of 2 things. I was in the scene because I was a club kid, and I hung out and knew the bands and knew the club owners and knew the bouncers and knew everyone. So I hung out with the local bands, and that gave me some access to hang out with the bands that came in from London, the punk bands and the bands that were starting their tours in the US. And, then I also worked at night for WBCN, which, as I was saying, was the commercial station there that started playing punk music early, and Boston Rock magazine. And with an assignment comes a pass and comes access, and you really were given carte blanche back then. It's but I was tenacious, man. I would be, the B-52s would come off stage, and I had a piece of white seamless paper tacked to the wall with tape, and I had a light set up, and man, I made them stop and do, a 10 frame session. It's like, that's what the Associated Press taught me. It's like, do whatever you need to do to get your picture and don't stop. And, although you had access, I also made people do stuff, it's so, it just, it's like your will, you will it to happen.
So I want to ask you just sort of about the process of prepping these images, and then maybe I'll ask you for our classic question of a secret tip. But just to start, I guess, punk has a very raw and unfiltered aesthetic to it. So what was the post process like of taking these images, which certainly must have captured this very raw scene, and trying to put I don't know, put polish on them, I guess. I guess you're not really polishing them too much, but preparing them for print in a way that preserves that rawness of the original scene.
Well, it's interesting. So as the project started, my normal retoucher that comes into the office was living in Italy. She had some visa issues and moved back to Italy. And I had this guy in Brazil that we would send him work back and forth. And when the project started, we wanted to do something interesting with it. And we started playing with looks. And this guy actually made this layer that he called dirt. And dirt had like these many components to it, but it was a little bit of like grain and noise and dirt, like dirt on a old movie. And it looked kind of cool. And then once we were ready for production and the publisher picked their images and we went back and forth, there's 162 images in the book. So once the publisher picked what they wanted and I said yes to the ones they liked and how about these, and we came up with a selection of images, then my pseudo staff retoucher who works under me in the office came in and she started like pulling back that layer of dirt on their faces and, burning and dodging. And there's a tremendous amount of work. And we always work on a very high resolution level. Like our scans are always 16-bit. They're always the highest resolution the scanner will go up to. They're usually way beyond even the film's resolution. So we have a souped up, a little older, but a Mac Pro tower that has a 2 terabyte SanDisk internal drive in it for speed. And all the work's done on that. It's a 12-core machine. And, she had to go in and retouch, and not retouch. Like we're not... In a documentary like this, you're not like fixing people. That's the one thing you're not, it's not a commercial shoot. You're not retouching so people look pretty. I think there's one picture where we helped Poison Ivy from the cramps and the lighting's just tough and she's got her fingers in her eyes like that. And we just cleaned it up a little bit. But for the most part, you're not really retouching, but you're burning and dodging and doing all that stuff you would do in a dark room where you want the action to come up. And if the stage lights were bad and I used flash, you're burning down the foreground and making it look natural. And it's this dance. We took weeks doing, months actually doing these images and taking another look at them. And Ilford gave us some gold fiber silk paper and we made test prints and we hung up the test prints. And it's like when you're doing a book, it's your baby. It's you want everything to look as good as possible. We did 3 rounds of proofs with the printer, and I thought the printer's head was going to explode, but that last round was the one. So it's a huge amount of work, and it's a huge amount of like file management and making sure everything's backed up and safe and all of that.
When we were talking to Brian Caparici, one thing he said is that a lot of people who are, from the film world who get into photography, one thing they get wrong is they kind of over-process their images after they've shot them. I think that may come from the the desire for a DP or a director to just like agonize over every shot and make sure it's absolutely as beautiful as possible, which you really can't do with motion pictures the way you can with stills. And just being able to look at a single image and spend so much time and so much effort to make sure it's perfect is certainly appealing to filmmakers and cinematographers alike. So as we're coming up on our time, I just want to throw out the last question, which we ask all our guests. And I'll put you on the spot a little bit.
Blue. Blue. You're going to ask me my favorite color, right?
42.
Yeah, 42. That's it. There's your answer.
What was my question now? I don't remember. So if you had a single tip that our listeners could apply to their next project, whether it is entirely practical in terms of like what to do with the lights or the camera, or something that's more theoretical, what is that one secret tip that you can give our listeners that they can take away and apply on their next project?
Seabiscuit in the third. I'll do a technical one, and I'll do a theoretical one.
Okay.
So the theoretical one is you can't stop. Like, you got to want it. You got to persevere. Like, you can't stop, and you've got to keep going, and you got to want it and do it no matter what, and work as hard as possible. Like, perseverance is the key to success in what is a very tough industry. The technical one, as I'm known for my lighting, we like to shoot tethered into the laptop or the computer. And really, like, if photographers listening to this are getting into lighting and curious about lighting, there's only one thing to do. You can't chimp it by looking at the image on the back of the camera, because that's an on-the-fly JPEG that's being made. You really need to open up the file, see it in Lightroom, look at because then you're looking at the raw file, and that's really important. When we shoot, we make sure that technically the data in the file is between the goalposts, I like to say, between the histogram, and it's, we're not clipping white, we're not shoving the blacks too far into the black where they'd be noisy or clipping them. But if you're playing with lighting, you really want to see what it looks like, and you can't really see what it looks like on a camera. You need to see what it looks like on a calibrated monitor, and we monitor the shoot that way. So that's my tip. As I like to say, look at what you're doing. Don't look at it on the back of the camera, because that's really not an accurate view of what you're doing. So
that's a great tip. And I think one that translates actually pretty well to film in the sense that, it's more and more common these days to have digital imaging technicians on set to be able to take, cards out of cameras and load them up, and maybe even do like a primary grade on it, just to see how did it turn out. I mean, outside of, like you said, sort of staying in the goalposts of the histogram, what can you actually do with it at the end of the day? So great advice. Okay. Michael, thanks so much for giving us some time today. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely. I'm really glad we have our wonderful audience here today. If they get a chance to check out the book, it's on Amazon. Punk, post-punk, new wave, on stage, backstage, and in your face. So check it out. You can always ping me. Love to know what you think. And I want to thank you guys and the audience again.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Big thanks to Michael Grecco for joining us. You can check out his book on Amazon, Punk, Post-Punk, New Wave, Onstage, Backstage, In Your Face, 1978 to 1991. It comes out on November 10th, so likely, if you're listening to this, it's out now. You can also check it out at daysofpunk.com. And if you're interested in taking a look at any of the shots we talked about in today's episode, you can do so at michaelgrecco.com. He's got tons of his celebrity photos and his athletic photos and all that on his website. So I encourage you to go check that out. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, what would really help us is some 5-star reviews on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Those kinds of things are really, really helpful for new podcasts like ours to get off the ground and grow. So, as always, for Chris Monlux and everyone here at Videomaker, I'm Mike Wilhelm, and you've been listening to the Videomaker podcast. We'll catch you next time.